Welcome back as we continue our discussions on the European worldview, Eurocentric race psychology. I am Dr. Slater Sarah. So far, we talked about the concept of race and delve into race psychology as it is connected to modern society, dynamics, issues, and challenges in modern society. So we're going to continue to talk briefly about this concept of eugenics in Eurocentric race psychology. Now, eugenics is an important thing to understand. All people should understand, especially Black folks, should understand the significance of eugenics and how it impacted Eurocentric psychology. Eugenics is the study of the genetic cause and control of human racial traits. And like we said before, in the previous discussion, credibility of scientific justification came about as a result of eugenics based on race. So popular public legitimacy of bias, racism, things like that towards people of color, but African, Black people in general, came about because of the European race psychology, in addition to concepts related to eugenics. So the idea that all science must be based on sensory experience, and we also understand psychology as being a study of behavior and mental process. Remember or recall from the previous unit, we identified that European race psychology emphasized the study of human behavior and attempted to connect color to physical traits or physical characteristics. So the eugenics in Eurocentric psychology eugenics helped to support or came about in support of this bias of differentiating African from European, superior from inferior. Darwin's survival of the fittest doctrine, we discussed before, supported that as well. And in addition to Mendel's law of genetic transmission, and that involved traits, dominant genes being expressed over recessive genes. So the goal of eugenics was to create a master race, or a race that was superior. I'm sorry, that's a better way of saying it. To create a superior race. So in the effort to create a superior race in eugenics, we have the goal of identifying the European as superior based on eugenics, and the African identified as inferior. These traits psychological and mental traits were supposed to follow the family bloodlines. And the idea based on eugenics was that these traits could be improved on through controlled breeding and artificial selection. So if someone had a bad genetic trait, we talked about the breeding or controlled breeding in the previous unit, then you could breed a master race. And also some of the dynamics of the challenges in the European having to deal with the African meant that the African was the bad seed, and the African would engage or act like their father if the father was slow, cunning, things like that. Then the African would have to be fixed or improved upon. And that was supposed to be, based on this eugenics doctrine, the white man's burden. Several eugenicists were important, again, in the field of psychology. G. Stanley Hall in his recapitulation theory. Thorndike was a strong advocate for eugenics. Robert Woodward in the 1904 World's Fair, eugenicists. All these eugenics eugenicists really emphasized this inferiority and superiority differentiation and created applied eugenics programs that were supposed to emphasize the betterment of the race and emphasize the breeding of a master race. Other organizations included the Carnegie Institute, which was a strong eugenics or key eugenics organization. So we talk about publishing things in writing on eugenics. The Carnegie Institute helped in facilitating publishing and writing on eugenics. We also had the American Breeders Association, which advocated for controlled breeding of human beings. And that controlled breeding, remember, was supposed to emphasize breeding of the master race. So also key in eugenics was this move for forced sterilization. Forced sterilization meant that if you were inferior or considered mentally unfit, then you would have to be sterilized. And the key in being sterilized meant that this forced sterilization was for those who were considered mentally or socially unfit. And by the 1930s, half of the U.S. states, based on this eugenics movement and European race psychology, half of U.S. states had laws of forced sterilization. And then by 1945, 2/3 of the U.S. states had laws on forced sterilization. So social status and social selection among Europeans were based on eugenics thinking, marriage, family planning. All of these things were centered around eugenics. And again, breeding the master or superior, what was considered a superior race. Controlled breeding, controlled getting rid of. So if you think about what this looks like, the goal was to get rid of those who were considered intellectually inferior, and then to breed or establish those who were considered intellectually superior. So the goal is to get rid of people of color, African people, and other people of color, and to increase the existence of European people. We can remember the crest theory of color confrontation that was discussed in a previous unit, and the emphasis on eugenics is rooted in the European survival thrust. So the mulatto hypothesis was an important part of how this system works. And how the system works is that those who have Caucasian blood were considered superior to those who came from an African genetic condition, such that individuals of mixed race would be considered intellectually superior the more European or white blood they have, and the more African blood more intellectually inferior. This continues today because Black folks tend to still suffer with challenges associated with things like colorism. And there was a phrase from back in the day: if you're white, you're all right. If you're brown, stick around. Wait, if you're white, you're all right. If you're yellow, you're mellow. If you're brown, stick around. If you're black, get back, get back, get back. That emphasizes or highlights the emphasis on this color challenge associated with so-called superiority associated with people who did not have darker skin tones. So again, racially mixed or blacks with a greater proportion of Caucasian blood were considered more superior than those with African blood. And that generalized to all forms of psychological functioning, behavior, intelligence, attractiveness, character, personality, social status, and conduct. Now, I meant to note this earlier, but the American Psychological Association, or APA, did an apology on or send a whole letter of apology and announce an apology for their contribution to this Eurocentric European race psychology, the implementation of it. So their apology was really what Azebo kind of detailed here, where he argued that European psychology, in an effort to maintain European domination and control, the European domination and control enterprise consisted of: one, ranking people in order of their fitness for survival, establishing that the most fit were those who enjoy the higher social situations. That means the more money, more access to things. And as a result, that determined whatever the fitness was. And that fitness included mental and character attributes that are inherited. So if you're the most fit, that means you're European. You're supposedly, rich or more socially fit, which is an important component. In addition to that, your mental characteristics, you inherit intelligence based on European race psychology, argued that European people, in an effort to maintain European domination and control, contributed to creating this image that Europeans had to be more intelligent than not mostly African, but all other people of color. And that you can inherit all of these mental characteristics and attributes, and the inner qualities, like mental and character attributes, are more as predictable based on your color or race. So if you're white, you're supposed to be calm, happy, easygoing, intelligent. An African person is supposed to be mad, aggressive, all of those things. And based on, again, the racial characteristics, not considering any of the challenges African people face with oppression and things like that. So the idea in European race psychology argued that we can know the inner qualities that contribute to fitness just simply by looking at the individual. Additionally, that these inner qualities or these inner characteristics are also connected to genetic inheritance, that as you inherit the intelligence, the ability that comes from the color or race that you are. So these characteristics, again, that were associated with Africans are dominant, and those associated with whites then are technically recessive. Whites then occupy higher social situations, then as a result are considered the most fit because they fit as a ruling class. They have the higher social strata. They're the most work, have more access to jobs and resources. In the African, the most melanated, the most pigmented were at the very bottom. And based on eugenics, the removal from the human population were associated with the less fit. Therefore, the less fit should be removed from the population. So again, if this was not clear, eugenics argued for the removal of African people from the planet and breeding of a superior race, which was supposed to be the European. So when we see the killing of Black men, when we review the theoretical perspectives of Urugu in our attempt to understand European theory, European psyche, it all makes sense. So I would encourage you to continue to read and study the treatment of African people and the eugenics movement. Oh, I forgot to say, hold on, very important. We talked about the eugenics organizations, but I did not talk about Planned Parenthood and its part in eugenics. Planned Parenthood being one of the primary institutions that emphasizes today, potentially, managing breeding by having easy access to abortions in your states. Now, modern times, they overturned Roe versus Wade. We talked about how it's important for the reversal of the birth rate for the European. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Thank you. Again, I'm Dr. Slater Sarah.